Hello, U.S. history students and APUSH students. So here is a chapter 31, The Age of Limits to the Age of Reagan. We're talking about politics after Watergate, the Ford and Carter years, basically mid 1974 to the election of 1980. Okay, now giving a little background here. So President Ford comes in. Remember, he wasn't even the vice president. Okay, Spiro Agnew was the vice president, and similar to President Nixon, he basically had to resign too. They caught Agnew taking basically bribes. So that's when President Nixon asked Gerald Ford to be the vice president, and then the next thing you know, he becomes president. And think about what he has to face. He has to face the ending of the Vietnam War, okay, and obviously not working well out for the United States. He also has to face inflation and high unemployment called stagflation. And then perhaps the greatest issue he has to face is just confidence in the overall American system and the ability of the president to follow the Constitution. All right. Well, pretty soon after he becomes president, he grants Nixon a full, free, and absolute pardon, which basically means that Nixon will never go to court, never can be punished, never go to jail for any of the crimes he committed, such as perjury or obstruction of justice. Okay. Some people believe it's a secret type of deal that he made with Nixon, but the reality is Ford simply said he wanted America to heal and America to move on. Okay. So President Ford has to face what Nixon was also facing: high unemployment, high inflation, which is an unusual situation. Okay. And he comes up with this motto called WIN, which stands for whip inflation now. He says, we're going to cut spending, we're going to have higher interest rates, right? When you buy a home, a car, or get a loan for a business, but it made the recession even worse. Okay. Now, regarding foreign policy, okay, and the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union, because we're still in the Cold War, remember Nixon had started a period of détente, which means a friendlier relationship with the Soviet Union. He meets with the Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev and signs the arms control deal, strategic arms limitation talk or treaty. And this is a treaty, an agreement that was originally signed by Nixon. And so Ford continues this. Now, one of the major issues of this time is inflation, and it's mainly due to, or one of the main reasons is the high price of oil. Now, obviously, we know America is extremely reliant on oil, and much of the oil comes from the Middle East. And several Middle Eastern countries came together and formed what we would call a cartel, the oil petroleum exporting countries. And they're the ones that are going to determine how much oil they're going to put on the market. So basically, a small amount of countries are going to decide the one of the most precious raw materials on this earth. Okay, and one issue that Ford is able to accomplish, right, is the long-term battle between Israel, right, and the Arab states around them. Because as you know, Israel was created in 1948, and since then has been in a constant state of warfare. We had this Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, and Ford is going to start the process of having the country of Israel, having a better relationship with the Arab countries around them, which will hopefully stabilize oil. Okay. Now, the 1976 election comes along, and remember, Ford really hasn't had that much time as president, less than a year and a half. Okay. And as you see the results over here, let me move my face out of the way. Okay. There you go. Okay. So Carter wins much of the South as a Democrat, which we don't see anymore, right? Republicans, right? California is Gerald Ford, and then Ronald Reagan over here, okay? He basically challenges Ford, which is a very unusual situation. Usually don't challenge a sitting president when they're up for reelection. So he was able to win a very, very, very small percentage, but basically he is putting his name out there already that he's ready to become president, and he will be. Okay. So Carter is able to win, and we really don't know if that's because of what happened with Nixon, the inflation, Vietnam and so on, or did really Carter win? Okay. President Carter, domestic affairs. Okay. What does he have to face? Well, the issues of energy and the economy again. Okay. He says we're going to raise public spending to reduce unemployment, and then he's going to cut federal taxes. Okay. It doesn't really work. Why? Because there's one thing that he cannot control, and that is the price of oil. Okay. Interest rates also reach an exponentially high 20%. Nowadays, you could get a loan for a home under 5%, even in the 4 percentage points. 20% is absolutely incredible to any of us that weren't adults going back into the 1970s, that rate. So Jimmy Carter makes this huge, gigantic public relations mistake, or basically a nightmare. Okay, he comes on TV from the Oval Office, right, his office in the White House, and gives a speech which is called the Crisis of Confidence speech. However, the American press has nicknamed it the malaise speech. Malaise means that you're just out of it, right? It means that something's wrong, but you're not really sure. You can't really pinpoint what's wrong. Okay. Why are you lacking energy? Why are you lacking motivation? Well, Jimmy Carter comes on and tells America basically you're lacking motivation. Things aren't going as well as you think they should, is because basically you're consumer driven. You're not worried about the important things in life. You're worried about making money. You're spending money on the wrong things. And this really touched a nerve with a lot of people in America who were struggling and definitely weren't living a life of luxury. Huge public relations mistake. Okay. Now, Carter in foreign affairs had one major victory and one major loss. Okay. Now, Carter said, my foreign policy is not going to be directed just regarding what is going on with the spread of communism, right, and the Soviet Union. His foreign affair policy will be based on a commitment to human rights, that people have the ability to vote, to be part of the democratic process. If they're accused of a crime, they have to have a trial, basically saying you guys need to have some type of system similar to our Bill of Rights in our justice system. Okay. Now, his major victory is the Camp David Accords. Camp David is in Maryland, and it's a presidential retreat. Okay. Now, Jimmy Carter is able to get the Egyptian president Anwar Sadat and the Israeli prime minister Menachem Begin to basically make this monumental agreement, okay, that they were basically going to stop fighting each other. They'd been in a constant state of warfare, right, almost going back to the beginning of Israel, as I stated earlier, in 1948. This also shows that America plays a crucial role and that both sides of these perpetual enemies, the Arab side, the Israeli side, actually trust the United States. Okay? And this is the first time you get a major Arab country to recognize the right of Israel to exist. We also think that is going to definitely calm down the warfare or any of the infighting in the Middle East, which also makes oil much more stable. Okay, so a huge victory. He also continues the relationship with China that was started by Nixon. Okay, and he finishes SALT II, originally signed by Nixon, extended by Ford, and then added on to by Jimmy Carter. It limits the number of intercontinental ballistic missiles. However, it's not officially recognized because things changed drastically in 1979 when Afghanistan, okay, is invaded by the Soviet Union, and then all bets are off, and we have the beginning of a cold period again in the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. Okay. Let me get out of here for a second. All right. So, what we see here is that the big mistake that was made by Carter, okay, was the Iran hostage crisis, okay? Now, what we do know is that for many decades, going back to the 1950s, the U.S. supported the Shah. The Shah is the term for the king of Iran. That's not his name, that's his title. It's called the Shah. And why did we support the Shah? Because the Shah basically protected American and British business interests, right? And protected oil. Okay. But in 1979, there was a conservative revolution led by Ayatollah Khomeini. Okay. Now, the Ayatollah is also a title, it's not his name. Ayatollah means the wise one, the learned one, the teacher. So Ayatollah Khomeini spoke out against American influence and said basically that it was just another form of colonialism. Because Americans and British and other foreigners were there, it was leading the people away from a strict interpretation of the Quran. So the Ayatollah Khomeini convinced many people within Iran to basically have a revolution to kick the foreigners out. And what happened was in November, the American embassy in the capital of Tehran was attacked, and 53 Americans were taken hostage for over a year. And literally every single night, okay, for over 100 days, over 100 days, it was the top story in the news. Jimmy Carter tried to, but was unable to bring them back home. And this was basically the last nail in the coffin for Jimmy Carter and the Democratic Party to have a chance. So we're going to move into the conservative era of the 1980s. Okay? I hope you enjoyed this video.